coming out today. My name is Ann Schiffenhaus. I am Director of Community Relations and Advocacy for Housing Assistance Corporation, and I'm also kind of the lead face right now for Housing to Protect Cape Cod. That's a new initiative that came out last year. I'll talk about it in a little bit. We're really excited to be doing this today. So there is a working group of people in Falmouth that I have been working with since January, kind of trying to understand how we help educate and move awareness about what's happening in Falmouth and in the greater Cape Cod in terms of housing. Everyone's been hearing about it, I'm sure, in the papers, both locally and in the state, that housing is an issue across the board. Today's purpose is to get you educated, let you ask questions, and also during public comment, like share ideas for a solution. We've done this before in a couple towns, I have, and the ideas for solutions have been fabulous. Creative, crazy, everything, but no solution or idea is bad. We need to work together to figure out how to solve this problem, and it's not a one solution fits all. So if we look at our agenda real quick today, I don't think, sorry Carrie, we're gonna be able to do the housing video because I forgot a USB cord, so that's my fault, but it will be on. We'll give you a link to it for anybody who signed up in the back. I'll get you a link to the video so you can see it. Unfortunately, our guest speakers, Leslie Sandberg is not able to come and Tucker is MIA, but he was at the State House yesterday, so I'm trying to figure out if they're gonna be involved at all. Leslie can come at a future date. We'll be doing more educational forums like this in the future. And Tucker, I don't know, but I hope he's safe or he's on a boat going home, I don't know. So we'll just go into the guest panel discussion a little bit sooner, which is great. We've got some amazing people here today to share what's happening for them, how the housing crisis has impacted them or their staff, their organization, and how they've adjusted. As well as we'll open up to the end so you can ask questions, share a housing story, anything of that nature. We can just have an open discussion. So typically when I do these huddles, this is like my 6th huddle. Everybody's used to PowerPoint presentations, but having been in sales a long time ago, every PowerPoint presentation you remember 3 things: something that you were impacted by, something you already knew, and something you don't really care. So we wanted to bring this information to you to take it home and really understand a little bit more deeper what's happening in Falmouth. So the first document is really just what my presentation would be about Housing Assistance Corp. If you're not familiar with us, is everyone familiar with Housing Assistance Corporation? Okay, we are the largest regional rental assistance organization in Cape Cod and the islands. We started out 49 years ago as a pilot program from the mayor, and 49 years later, we do 1,200 vouchers a month, totaling about $13 million a year in rental assistance. We also have other programs. We do weatherization and energy efficiency. We do financial classes for anyone who wants to learn about how to be smarter about doing a budget, first-time home buyers, just managing your money to be able to build wealth, as well as we created some new programs. Housing to Protect Cape Cod is one. That's a joint initiative with 5 other organizations. It is Housing Assistance, it's the Cape Cod Chamber, the Cape Cod and Islands Realtors Association, Home Builders, Remodelers, and Cape Built, as well as 19 other organizations across Cape Cod that service from a food, security, housing, et cetera. That initiative was brought to really understand that the need for housing goes across the board, from very low income to market rate. We don't have enough housing, and Housing to Protect Cape Cod is really trying to educate people and let them understand that a year-round workforce is at all different income levels, and we need to be able to have housing that meets that. As you flip through the pages, I tried to add some very specific for your town where housing assistance is working with residents here. So that's pages 2 and 3. If you go to page 4, this is a great slide that I use in every presentation. It really lets you see the power of purchasing and renting for the workforce that keeps your community alive. From a police officer to an accountant to a teacher, these are the people that need to be here, that are trying to find housing, trying to find rentals. And their purchasing power, although looks impressive on this page, when you flip to the next page, housing costs are too high. Maura Titus in the back, who said hello when you walked in as a realtor and gave me this information, the most recent, about the median home price. in Falmouth. And if you look at the earlier page, that's a big affordability gap from what a workforce member in one of these positions can afford to what is available today to buy or to rent. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. When you say buy, are you assuming a 20% down payment?
Yes.
For those numbers?
Yes. So it's just, this is just information for you to get a point in time look at your town in terms of, on the left-hand side, we looked at how many actual year-round single-family home listings there are and the price points for those. So that really narrows down what you're able to do. And let me tell you, on those lower prices, you're getting 10, 20, 30 people trying to get into those properties, as well as Karen Bissonette, who's here. She knows from a lottery perspective, she's been very active. We've been helping. We do some of the lotteries. I've done the pull. I've been the Vanna White. It's very satisfying to then talk to the homeowner who got the winning lottery house. But, there are people who have been in lotteries that we've seen 20 times trying in the last 5, 6 years, trying to get that house. And when they finally do, it's an amazing thing. It really is. And that's just one part of the solution. That's not the only solution. So this is just trying to let you have an understanding of, we don't project that home costs are going down. The demand is still there, and it will keep going. There's more information throughout that, talking about how you can get engaged, what you can expect. If anybody's looking for a volunteer position, there is a lot of committees open that could use your help. So I wanted to leave that. The second thing is, this housing profile has got a lot of great data. So this was created by the Cape Cod Commission. So right now they're redoing their regional housing policy. They do it every 5 years, and they give out interim deliverables, and one of them is this. And this is something to take home and really look at. It gives you your population, your current housing stock. So when we talk about housing diversity, we're talking about housing type diversity. So majority of Cape Cod is single-family homes. That's great for some people. Not everyone wants a single-family home when they're 24 or even 55 or 65. They want to have diversity in where they can move based on their need. This study, this is just one component of the study. So we work with Cape Cod Commission. We're at a level lower. They're really working more at town government level, and I'm working more down at residents, business owners, et cetera. But the completion of the study should be in the end of the summer or the fall. So there'll be more data that will give you an idea of, from a regional look as well, what they think is going to happen, and hopefully they will put some guidelines around that. Will be to be determined. The third picture, which isn't the great of a graphic, but it is a picture. Housing Assistance Corporation and Association to Preserve Cape Cod 2 years ago sat down and said, we have to figure out a way to stop the fighting between the environmentalists and housing, pro-housing. And how do we do that? They had 13 people, and they spent 2 years building an interactive smart map by town. So what this shows you, and you can go into housingtoprotectcapecod.org and find the smart map. And you can go in and look at your town. You can even go down to an individual parcel level to see where that parcel lands in a town. The purpose of this was not to dictate where you build. The purpose of this was to facilitate a conversation that says environmentalists and pro-housing can work together in towns to identify where it makes the most sense to build. And there was I think 18 factors that went into this. So areas that are already naturally preserved, endangered species, flood zones, et cetera, completely out of the picture. We looked for areas that were on sewer, on transportation, near community activity centers, which is a place type the Cape Cod Commission uses to find where do we build that, one, would create walkable cities, right? Walkable towns. So you don't have the need for a car. You're able to move where you want. And then lastly, this is the good stuff. So Housing to Protect Cape Cod was launched last November. And at that launch, it was at the Cape Cod Resort. We had 380 people there, very interested in understanding how we as a region work together to get housing done. We commissioned this study by a group out of California called the Conquer Group when we had them come present. So they did an economic analysis of Cape Cod and the impact of the housing crisis. And this is really the summary, okay, with 92 pages. So if anybody likes graphs and reports, It's online on housingprotectcapecod.org. You could look at the full study. But the big takeaways are, 48% of the workforce is now commuting on Cape. We're losing close to 1,000 households a year off Cape because they can't afford to live here anymore, or they choose to leave, right? They choose that the market is high, their biggest asset is a home, they want to sell and move. But it's a trend we have to figure out how to stop and how to reduce to keep us and our communities vibrant. So this is really good information. I hope you all take it home, look at it, study it, get educated, talk to your spouse, your neighbor, your friend, your kids about it, especially kids, because we have one younger person in our working group, Kelly McEwen, from who's a graduate student, and she's fabulous because she's representing a point of view that, I'm not in my 20s. I'm not going to say how old I am, but we have to have the dynamic in our working group of every constituency and where they are coming from, so that we have a comprehensive view of what really needs to be done. So that's my 10-minute just overview, because I'm not the one you want to listen to. But the rest of this, so unfortunately, Leslie Sandberg with the Provincetown Select Board, she called me last night. She can't come because she had to fill in for a friend at work, so that's a no. And Tucker, I have no idea. I know he was at the State House last night petitioning. I thought he was coming, but I don't see him and I haven't heard from him, so I'm not sure what happened there. I'm very sorry, but we will get him back because we plan on doing these type of events with different focuses on education in every event. So without further ado, I would like to invite up our Michael Kasparian, who everyone knows. Do you know? CEO and President of Cape Falmouth, the Chamber. He's going to be our lead speaker, and I'd like our panelists to come up.
Thank you, Ann. I get a booming voice anyway, but yeah, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for coming. This has been a really good experience. We first started working with HAC. It was been almost 2 years now when we had produced with FCTV an educational video on housing in Falmouth. And we were approached by HAC. HAC was part of our panel, and we started working with them, and we were invited to join this huddle that meets every other week in Falmouth to talk about housing. And our philosophy at the Chamber is that, as many people that want to talk about it, we want to participate with, because it's such a big problem, it's such an issue, and I think that the more people we can get working on it together, the better. I want to just, before I let everybody introduce themselves on the panel, I just want to preface by a couple things. So, as Ann pointed out, I am the president of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, and I work very closely with the executive directors or presidents of the other chambers across the Cape. And the good news is, because when we talk about housing, sometimes it can be really doomy and gloomy, but the good news is Falmouth is probably better off than any town on the Cape, I would have to say. We have a select board that understands and cares. We have a planning board that has done some really good work on housing, and there are projects moving forward and projects in the works. In fact, what Ann had talked about, the challenge of environmentalists and housing, it's so closely connected that we can't solve one problem without solving the other, because the environment is really truly our greatest asset. And that really, I think, is understood at town meeting. If you recall, one of the things the planning board brought up was a by right area going up Davis Straits where business owners by right could build residential housing above. And it was proposed to town meeting, and then my good friend and longtime town meeting member Joe Netto got up and offered an amendment, and he wanted it to stop where the sewer ran out, because he did not want to see that happen where there would be issues with septic. And town meeting understood that. So it was a win-win, not only for the housing advocates, but for environmental advocates as well. So I think coming together and working together, this can all come together, and we're very, very happy with that. So that being said, if I'd like to, I'll start with Carter, and if you could just introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about why you're here and how housing is impacting you.
Certainly. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carter Hunt. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Falmouth Hospital for Cape Cod Healthcare. I've been with the health system now for just about 10 years. My family, my mother grew up in Falmouth, Susan Sheehan Hunt, so I've been very close to this community for a very, very long time. So, I think from our perspective as an overview, we certainly see a large demographic of individuals that work for our institution, a wide range of economic backgrounds, a wide range of family support backgrounds, and it's a challenge for us. We certainly during the COVID outbreak, we had a lot of challenges with recruitment and retention of individuals here to the Cape, and as an asset to this community, we are really focused on trying to find housing for our employees, folks that want to come and live and work at the Cape for the rest of their lives is our goal. We certainly have to deal with a number of individuals that come and help us on a traveling basis, but our goal is really to identify individuals that can set up their roots, can be supportive of our community and supportive of our health system for the long term. We have an aging workforce, certainly in all of our facilities across the Cape, and our ability to recruit individuals to come down to Cape Cod and set up their families and set up their lives is extremely important to us. It's extremely important to our families, to my parents who will be using the health system more and more as they age. And so I think we function in a very similar fashion to most other of the industries here, on the Cape, and really trying to identify, recruit, and retain individuals. And part of that process is finding them housing that they can commit to for a long period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter McConaty, I'm the Director of Public Works. I've worked for the town of Falmouth for approximately 17 years. During my tenure with Falmouth, I commuted from over the bridge. I lived in Pembroke, so I had to commute 2 hours a day. In the summertime, anyone would know what that looks like coming over the bridge. I have three basically matters that we need to contend with at Public Works regarding personnel. The first one is the workforce for our laborers and for our workforce to be able to go out and be able to take care of all the maintenance factors that we have in town. The second one is a management perspective. On Cape Cod, with our water system and our wastewater system and our engineering system, we have licenses that are required, and there's only so many individuals on Cape Cod that we can pick from. We don't like to poach from other towns. Obviously, sometimes we have to, and we do, but those licenses need to come from over the bridge. We've been successful for most of our management positions. We do have several key management positions that we have not been so successful. We've gone out 4 times with them, and we have not had any successful candidates, basically because of the off-Cape, and they'd have to relocate and find housing on Cape Cod. Third part of it is we have seasonal. We have seasonal beach staff, and we also have seasonal park staff. The town has done a large effort. They've done a large effort over the past several years to redo the compensation plan for the DPW workers. So there was a large increase for public works workers. There was a large increase for seasonal workers, and currently, right now at this time, there's a compensation study going on for completion in July for management staff. And even with that, we've found that we're still having difficulties bringing staff in with the housing force. So in order for us to be able to do all our chores that are needed for us, we keep on adding inventory and keep on adding resources for the town of Falmouth. We need to have the staff to be able to be able to maintain that and take care of it. Second part is, as Public Works, another matter that we have to look at is when we do development and on the Cape, or if we do development in Falmouth, we need to look at the infrastructure and the resources. We need to look at the water system. We need to look at the wastewater system. We need to look at the highway system, the park system, how that's being affected, all the new development throughout town. How does that affect Public Works? Public Works as a department, a large department in Falmouth, we're required to maintain all the streets and all the infrastructure, the water and the wastewater with that. So that can become a challenge for us on the infrastructure side. Transportation, it was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that key areas and local areas in the downtown sections of Falmouth, to be able to be on a transportation system, to be able to walk or bike or ride to the local attractions. That would be key areas for us when these housing developments come up or these projects come up. One of the first items that I bring up is that's great, but who's doing the transportation studies? We need to look at the roadway systems and who's doing the queuing factors on the roads and how is that gonna be handled within Falmouth? Anyone that comes across the Cape from April through October, coming from Wacoit down to Falmouth knows how long it takes to get here. And we just have to, as a town and as a department, need to be cognizant of, we don't want to make that any worse than it really is. We need to be able to work with the transportation factors and the housing to be able to put them in key areas. So those two are probably equally important for us, as the personnel and also the development and where it's located throughout town. So those are the two areas that we look for during the project phase and the development phase of any project. But we'll be here for a while. Be glad to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Hi. Good morning. I'm Paul Spear. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Marine Biological Laboratory. I have been here since late 2014, but I'm also a graduate of the joint program in oceanography offered by WHOI and MIT a long time ago. You can tell from the color of my hair. Yeah. And so back in those days, I was a graduate student living in Falmouth, and I was living the dream back then of finding a place to stay, but I can tell you now it's a lot worse than that. So anyhow, I see colleagues of mine from Woods Hole Oceanographic here, so Falmouth and Woods Hole is kind of an amazing town. You have 6 private and government research labs, academic institutions in this town. It's just an incredible concentration of scientific talent here, and these are premier operations. Woods Hole Oceanographic is the largest private oceanographic research institution in the world. The MBL is a destination for high-end biological research. So these, we employ a lot of people. This is the big economic drivers of this area. And the housing situation on the Cape, I think, has affected us in a number of different ways. And I think it's easiest for me to tell you about that by talking about how the MBL is set up and who is very similar. So the first part we have 270 full-time employees at the MBL. Well over half of those folks are involved with a scientific enterprise. So they're either doing the science or they're directly supporting the science. The other half of the other part of the institution are the people that support all that. So when we talk about the research component, what are we talking about? We're talking about the scientists in their labs. We're talking about research assistants, postdocs. Those are folks that have just finished their PhDs and are starting off their research career. And we're talking about graduate students. When we talk about folks that are directly supporting research, those are the folks that, for example, at the MBL run our high-tech imaging center, that operate our boats, that take care of marine organisms, and all that stuff that directly supports the science that goes on. So that's one part of the lab. And the reason I'm going to go through this is because the housing problems here affect the different components of the lab differently. This other part is the folks that support all that to make the whole thing go. So that's our skilled tradespeople that make sure our facilities are operating. It's our finance department. It's our IT department. It's our campus security. It's our custodial folks and all those folks that make sure that the place is operating so the science can take place. So what we have found at the MBL is that the housing problems are affecting those two groups in different ways. So let me start with the staff that supports the operation, and I'll get to the science piece. The folks that staff our operations, generally, most of them live in Barnstable County or nearly adjacent to it. We do have people coming from over the bridge. What we have discovered over the last several years is that because those folks are living, because folks who do those jobs generally work around us. In other words, when we have a vacancy for a position, if we have a vacancy for a position on our finance department, nobody's picking up and moving from way across the state or from another state to come here. Those folks are all sort of in this area. So what we are doing when we have one of those positions open is we're competing against everybody else that has a finance department. We're competing against anybody else that needs a skilled trade. And what has happened to us over the last several years is that we have found very high rates of vacancy in our jobs. So we are simply unable to hire people to come in. And when I say that, I'm talking 10 to 15, we've gone through stretches of 10 to 15% of our positions remain unfilled in that part of the organization. So what does that mean? That puts enormous stress on the people who are working there, and it impacts the effectiveness of the organization itself. So that's the staff side. On the research side, it's a significantly different issue. There, again, we have scientists and we have the folks that work with the scientists or study under the scientists. Research assistants, those are generally folks who have just come out of undergraduate with a science degree, and they're coming to work usually for a couple years before they go on to graduate school. We have postdocs. Those are folks who have finished their PhDs. They're at the very beginning of their career, and they are going to come and stay at the lab for a number of years before departing. And we have graduate students. Those are the folks who have finished their undergraduate experience and are now getting their PhDs or masters. And those people are the ones, think about them as the engines of the science that goes on in the lab. Without those young, and they're generally young folks, they're going to be here for a short while, the science doesn't get done. All these folks are going to be here, they're going to be renting. Okay, so they're not, and the other important piece is they're all coming from somewhere else. There are not lots and lots of colleges and universities in Barnstable County, or even right across the bridge from Barnstable County. So these folks are coming from institutions in Massachusetts, California, Texas, and actually from other countries as well. They're going to arrive here, and they need a place to rent. And now we all know what the rental market is like on the Cape. It's a huge challenge. So lack of year-round rentals, affordable or otherwise. Exorbitant summer rentals. And situations that we have discovered now where we have some of our young folks that are working in research who are sharing a house that they're renting and having the rent abruptly ended and suddenly finding themselves out on the street. So as you can imagine, this presents an enormous challenge for the science to get done. When folks have a concern about their housing, they're not as effective, going to be as effective at work. And we know from some work that has been done by our postdoc association that probably something on the order of 40 or 45% of those folks feel stress on a regular basis about their housing situation. And that's just incompatible with the work that's getting done. And we are also now discovering, we don't know the exact percentage, but we are now discovering that a not insignificant number of these folks at the MBL have gone temporarily without a roof over their head. So what we now call unhoused. And this is a real significant issue for us. And I know that HUI has been dealing with the same issue, and I suspect the other institutions have as well. So what's the MBL doing? Well, we know that the rental market and the lack of housing is a long-term problem. So we know we've got a short-term, we know we've got a challenging situation that we're going to have to deal with for the foreseeable future. So two things that we're doing right now. One is the MBL actually owns housing. From April through early November, we'll have 3,500 people come through our campus and stay and do research. And thankfully, we're not putting those people out in the community. We're taking care of them ourselves. So we do have some housing available. It's primarily for the programs that we run, but we now have an emergency. We now have put in place the ability for folks who have suddenly find themselves without housing to let us know that they have an emergency, and we're taking care of that situation by finding housing for them. The second thing we've done is we've discovered that amongst our staff and other people who are affiliated with the MBL, sometimes people are willing to rent a room or rent some space in their house. They don't want to put it out on the market, but they have a willingness to do this. So we've set up a social channel within MBL now to try to do some matching of people who might have a space available with our folks. You know, take a scientist, you know, take a up-and-coming scientist on board. That's an critically important thing you can do for their career. And that's really important in the summer because a lot of our folks, what happens is they're in a seasonal rental because those are the most common, and you got to be out of them in June. On June 1st, you got to be out, and you can't get back until September. So we're trying to do those kinds of things And we're also, at the same time, doing a detailed and deep look at the housing that we have available and how we might recapitalize that housing and figure out a way to use it more efficiently to help run both our programs and to look out for the situation that our scientists and their folks find themselves in. So that's kind of where we are. For the moment, we are able still to track the best scientists, and should tell you that, absent being competitive for the top talent, there's no point having these organizations. There's literally, we don't need to be here if we're not bringing in the top people. Right now, we are still able to do that. We have begun to see signs amongst our early career scientists coming that the housing issue is a challenge. That's an early warning sign for us. It's an early warning existential sign for us that there's a problem brewing that we need to be very alert to, because as I say, if we're not bringing in top scientists, there's no point to what we're doing. So anyhow, that's where we are.
Thank you, Paul. Chief, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Right. If you want to just say hello to the folks and talk a little bit about your perspective.
Sure. Well, good morning, and I apologize for my delay in getting here, but the staffing issues that kind of get infused with what we're talking about here continue daily. Yeah, I mean, the housing issue is definitely something that that has been impactful in the last few years, and I think that for us, and I was trying to follow something that Kim had outlined to try and provide that perspective to the group here, that over the years has been requiring us to make changes on how we try and recruit personnel or look for qualified candidates. And in particular, our department followed civil service administration for some time until recently, and part of civil service required that we had a residency statute or requirement within the civil service guidelines. And it used to be 10 miles that you had to live within 10 miles of the town in order to work in the department. And then we changed it to 15, and now we've gone to 30 miles. So they utilize as the crow flies as a guideline. So somebody that actually lives across Buzzards Bay might qualify. But we tend to see that our residency requirements allow us to have personnel live closer to the New Bedford border. And that's good for personnel that may be coming from that area. But it's not good for us because for many, many years, the fire services on the Cape have always relied on personnel that came to their departments and came to the community, became part of the community, and lived there with their families, and were just a part of the infrastructure, and had their kids going to school here, utilize the services that are abundant for us, hospitals, schools, you name it. But we don't see that anymore. We're starting to see a lot more of our applicants coming from outside of the Cape. They are qualifying to live within that 30 miles. But if we had a major incident in the town, then getting them back to assist and to augment our staffing is not going to occur. So what has now shifted is that we have to utilize mutual aid, which is needed from other communities to help bolster our resources for major incidences. So part of that goes along with the current cost of living that many of our personnel have to take into effect when they are agreeing to work here. The salaries, they vary from community to community for the fire service. Right now, our firefighters, their salaries are based on contractual agreements, but the contractual agreements change every 3 years. So whereas Falmouth might be a little higher with their salaries for our personnel, another community may then be equal to Falmouth, but then the contracts change for that community or ours, and now you have another community that has a higher rate of pay, and if there's a vacancy in another department, then personnel start to look where the pay is. So that's also another factor, and we do lose personnel every once in a while because of pay. But for the most part, what we see when we do have attrition in our department through a resignation because a firefighter comes up to us and has an opportunity to work elsewhere, it's basically location. And we do see personnel that may have started in a community that's further out, work with us for a year or two, and then an opportunity arises in that department where they came from, and they move away. They move back there. Their families are there. The pay might be equal to or greater than, and that's what they will all in our exit interviews all speak very highly of the community. They speak highly of the organization. They speak highly of the peers that they're working with. They enjoy working here. It's just not working out for them. And again, single firefighters versus married firefighters, that's difference. A firefighter might be able to afford rent. We do have firefighters that live together. They rent homes together. They try and double up so that they can keep the costs down for themselves. Other families have found places locally, but it's not that often that we see people moving into Falmouth. Mashpee, Bourne, Sandwich, that's probably the bulk of where a lot of my personnel are right now. And beyond that, we have many that live over the bridge. And again, being in an emergency service, for many years, we depended on personnel coming to assist when we had major incidences, but that's shifted now. What we look at is the start of the day, and I need to have X amount of firefighters working at the start of the day, and that's what I have to utilize for my resource pool throughout the shifts. It's been working, but we do have impacts on a regular basis. Right now in our department, we do have vacancies, and we're in the process, thankfully, for the town's support and the administration and the community for adding additional personnel to our complement of staff, but that's going to take us a while to get these personnel in place. So we're utilizing the personnel that we have right now. So right now, we have about 18 positions that I have to fill. And we've been working on it. It's a very daunting activity. We actually were a little excited about it, but it's very daunting because there's so much involved in trying to hire in the public safety business. As I stated, the residency is an issue. Many of our personnel are willing to work extra hours, but you can imagine that in some instances they're mandated to work. In public safety, they can't, we have mandated shifts, unlike the scientists, I'm sure. They don't get held in the lab. But we do, and today's one of those days where I have personnel that are mandated to work. And so a lot of personnel, when they're done at the end of their week, they might be working 2, 3, 4 shifts in a row. That might be 48 hours. That they're ready to go home, and then we have less to count on. So if they lived closer, it might be a different story, but like I stated, many are living outside of town. So obviously, we're all affected by inflation. We're all affected by the cost of living that's, currently, that we're all seeing, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I am thankful that we have had many inquiries into working in our town. Now that we've shifted from civil service, we had at least 40 to 50 applications for the positions that I have. So that's, again, very, very encouraging. But once we get to that point where we're looking at, offering, letters of employment to these individuals, are they willing to take all that's encompassing to work here and to be part of the department? Or are they going to just be in their communities off Cape? And again, that again provides that impactfulness to our department. So I have, workforce housing, affordable housing, all these things that are trying to be done by many in the community. Still, I think that the cost is still pretty high. It may be better off Cape, and that's, otherwise, if it was better in town here, we'd be having people pulled into this area, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, the world being what it is, I hope that things change. I hope there's more opportunity for housing. I hope that costs might change in the future, and we can, and build up the community, because for us in the fire service, and I'm sure the police department is the same in other industries, that, community is rich for us. We work as a brotherhood and a sisterhood within the fire service, and we count on one another, and that's part of the same community that they're coming to live in and being a part of, and we want to see that, because it creates a lot of positiveness in our department. So.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's great. And it is a wonderful community. One of the things I've always loved about here is the 2 degrees of separation, except when you're trying to get in and out of the market. That's kind of challenging as well. But very much appreciate you sharing your perspectives. And it's interesting because when we talk about housing, there's an enormous amount of confusion. Affordable housing. You mentioned workforce housing. I think Kim Fisher, our housing coordinator, stated it best when she coined it. It's all attainable housing. Is there housing that people can attain? And we have some organizations, Falmouth Housing Authority, Falmouth Housing Trust, Habitat for Humanity, HAC, working really hard on folks who need to qualify, low income, people that need that. But I think what we're talking about here are the people in the middle. And I can certainly say that I think is a segment that is often overlooked. I know at the Chamber, one of the biggest questions we have from our members is about housing because they can't house employees. The challenge facing the community right now is that our businesses are going to start failing because they don't have people to work them. The biggest complaint we're getting from our businesses is they can't maximize their revenue because they don't have enough people to work. And so as expenses go up, at some point, when do you say it's not worth working this business anymore? I'm going to leave. Now, certainly, it's going to be incredibly daunting running a hospital. Not only are you dealing with challenges in housing, we have a population that's aging, 33,000 full-time residents, okay? I think that the number is somewhere where it's close to 45% of seniors now. That number is going to stay pretty much the same by 2030, but up to 60% seniors. So you're dealing with Medicare reimbursements, which obviously hit your bottom line, and still trying to run a hospital, as these other organizations. So when we talk about attainable housing, what type of housing would best serve your organization and help you to secure that the rest of us who are living here are going to be able to get the kind of health care we need?
Absolutely. And I think it runs the gamut, right? So, I think I mentioned it earlier, and much like my colleagues to the left, we have a wide range of individuals that are coming to work with us. And many of those individuals, we compete against local businesses for. We, finance, you talked about, that piece of it as well. I think for us, every piece, Mr. Loff, our CEO, talks about it's a team sport in healthcare, right? And so every piece of the puzzle is important to us. And if we have a gap in any one of those, much like we talked about with MBL, we have a problem. And we're seeing that level of concern in housing in every one of our departments, whether it's the IT department or finance or our housekeeping or our nursing staff and up into physicians as well. So attainable housing for folks we've got over 800 employees at Falmouth Hospital. Just about 70 of them are travelers that come to us temporarily, so we need temporary housing, right? And I think a lot of the same strategies of others. We've got travelers that live together. We've got families that have an extra room. We went out in the middle of COVID to all of our team members to try to find rooms for people to stay at, and we had a wonderful response from our employees to help us get through that crisis. But the attainable housing for us, we've got single folks, we've got families, we've got professionals and families that want to move to the Cape, but they've got in-laws and family members that need to, that need to come with them as well. A perfect example, we had a physician who wanted to join us, but couldn't, had housing for himself, but did not have housing for his in-laws that were going to move up from another area of the country, and it was just not affordable for them to be able to manage that. And we hear those stories coming, from everyone. So I think, to answer your question, attainable housing is really at every one of those levels for us. It's rentals, it's single-family homes, it's single-family homes with in-law apartments, it's short-term rentals, it's long-term rentals, and I think those are all pieces that play into us being able to recruit and retain individuals that come over from the Cape. We too have a lot of a portion of individuals that come from off Cape, live in the communities that are just over the bridge. And part of that is they've got opportunities that, sure, there's hospitals, all over the Commonwealth, but certainly in southeastern Massachusetts, there's a reasonable, and they're all searching for the same people that we are, right? We've got a wonderful place to live down here, obviously living on Cape Cod. When I brought my family back, I said, we're moving to Cape Cod. I mean, what more would you want, right? Those things don't, those things are struggle for us now because, folks look at that and they're going on the market even before they look at a job, right? They're looking to see what's out there. They're looking to see what's available to them. And when they come to us, they talk very highly and positively about Cape Cod healthcare, about the community, about where they're coming, but they just can't make that leap because they've done their research as well to know what's out there. So I think it impacts a lot of different levels for us in healthcare.
Thank you.
Yep.
Peter, for you and your work as people you're hiring, are they mostly looking to buy places, or is the rental component come in for, say, a entry-level position?
Yeah, I think what we find in Public Works is our labor force, most of the labor, a good portion of the labor force are usually residents of Falmouth. They're residents of Cape Cod. We've had multiple positions, the same as our colleagues have said. Since 2020 is basically 2019, 2020 is when we really started finding the problems and challenges trying to pick up workforce. And so now, when we put the employment out there, we're looking for different places to put them. So everyone goes to Indeed, we're looking for other challenges. We put them on, now we're going across the Cape and we're doing state agencies, we're doing Mass Waterworks, we're doing Mass Highway, we're doing UMass, Amherst, and we're getting folks from over the bridge. Yep. If they're on the South Shore, if they're Plymouth area, that could be okay. I was in the Pembroke area doing an hour a day. And if you're going to be a laborer in Falmouth and getting paid the rates that Falmouth pays, and it is competitive, but if you're going to be traveling 2 hours a day and you have a family on the other side of the bridge and you're traveling over that bridge and you're doing 8 to 10 hours in Falmouth, by the time you're getting home 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, that's challenging. And so that's what we find, we're having our challenges. We're having less and less individuals apply for positions. Public Works, a lot of our positions in Public Works, they're not glorious positions. It's manual labor positions. And so there's certain types of individuals out there that want to do that type of work. So it can be challenging. For an instance, my colleague gave an instance of an employee. We were looking for a water superintendent. We had a water superintendent call. He really wanted to come to Falmouth. He was in Falmouth many years ago, and he wanted to come back down to Falmouth. And what had happened is just looking for housing on Cape Cod. So it came down to that he was going to work 5 days a week. He was going to live 3 to 4 days at the Holiday Inn on Gifford Street, and it's just it doesn't work out. Right. You need to have housing, especially in a critical position like that you right. need to respond. So we were not able to hire him, and that happened to be the position that we put out 3 times. We're getting ready to put it out again. But as I say, when you're looking for water superintendents, wastewater superintendents, or engineers in those fields, it's usually not on Cape, it's off Cape. So they have to move on the Cape, and they have to consider the transportation, the traveling, and the housing. And we just find that the average housing in Falmouth, the prices are high. Well, across the Cape they're high, but in Falmouth they're high.
So both for you and for Carter, the folks that work for you both touch everybody in this room's lives every day. Now, Paul, I'm intrigued, you're talking about you have housing, and, which is great. So unlike, Carter and Peter, you actually have some housing. Could you expand on that housing? And what would you need in order to do that? Is zoning an issue? Is building, is space? Is it possible, and could the town possibly help you with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our housing is a whole mix of things that was acquired by, I would say, somewhat non-strategically by the MBL over the years. And it's a real mix of things like dormitory housing, because we bring lots and lots of students in from April through September for courses. It's some houses that we've acquired over time. It's some apartments that we have on campus. And then we have a large amount of, sort of traditional Cape Cod cottages up on a campus up off Oyster Pond Road. Most of those are seasonal. So, 68 of 74 cottages up there are seasonal. So they're open for 3 months.
And is that because of heating, et cetera?
Yeah,
Okay.
they were designed to be seasonal, so they have no insulation, no heating, no nothing. So, yeah, not, as I've said in Cape Cod, seasonal housing like that's it's a bad idea. The winter is hard on that stuff.
Sure, but could it be converted?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we're right now, one of the issues we have is we have a lot of housing. Our programs that use the housing for the most part operate for part of the year, so it's it's a little bit of a tough business model. So we're looking at the need to really recapitalize a lot of that housing, and right now we don't have the funds available, so we're going through a strategy of trying to figure out how would we come up with the funds to recapitalize that housing, probably reduce the stock of it because we can't afford to carry all this stuff and it's not used all the time, and seasonal housing's a challenge. And as part of that, we're trying to think about the component of housing, our own folks, and what role could we potentially play in affordable housing on the Cape. So we're sort of at the very beginning of a large look at where we are with our housing, yeah.
Sure. So what's interesting, before I run to the chief, you brought up dormitory style. So there's some creative things happening right now. Again, what I had talked about earlier was the planning board has worked really hard and identified areas that can be developed because they're on the sewer line, they're zoned for density, i.e. over where Staples is. For those of you who don't know, Kimco, the owner of that property, is looking to put 155 units in there. That would be all rental. That'd be a 40B, so 25% of those units would be affordable. Falmouth Housing Authority building the apartment on the corner of Scranton and Main for elderly folks, so we're adding apartments there. How many of you are familiar with Michael Galasso, our local developer, who's looking to turn the former Royal Nursing Center into dormitory type, right? So another good idea, which I want to get your comments on. And there's some issues there, like some parking waivers that are needed and some other stuff. And I know that people are working hard, and I think the town is really very supportive of that project. But we could add some units. But the thing about that is there's no affordability in that project. Everything's market rate. But that's not a bad thing because your folks won't really qualify, right? We're looking for market rate housing. So we have to think outside of the box. I know our new governor, Maura Healey, has really made it a priority to identify state-owned buildings. And I know that the town right now has been, I know our acting town manager is putting together a list of town-owned properties that could possibly be converted to or used property where housing could be built. So it doesn't necessarily have to all be for low income. But let's say that we did expand on that model and it was more dormitory and or rental type units that were being built. Would that be helpful? I want to start with the chief because he's at the end. He's got to hire 18 people. He's got to fill up a new fire station. How helpful would that be for you? Obviously not the most conducive for families, but getting entry-level people, seasonal people, et cetera. What do you think about that?
Well, the other component that we're seeing is that we're not seeing, 18 and 20-year-olds that are really flocking to work. We're finding personnel that may have been in the business, whether it's EMS or fire-related, that are in their 30s and 40s. So they're already established. They may have a home somewhere, they may have a family. So for them to pick up and come closer, that's, very difficult for them. But they might qualify, as I stated, on the residency side. The younger personnel, that is something that might be beneficial to them. But, one of my, I had a discussion yesterday because I had the opportunity to go to the Upper Cape Technical School to start looking at an elective to try and generate some excitement into the fire, police, and correction officer, jobs. And the school's, looking to do something other than, other trades. And part of that, we started to talk about the differences that we're seeing. Like when I started, and I date myself, I started here in 1987. And when I started, I came from the Coast Guard, and I worked for 5 years in the Coast Guard. And for 5 years, my housing was taken care of. I didn't have an issue with housing, whether I was on a ship or I was in a dorm, a barracks, or then the other thing that was a benefit is eventually when I was living in a barracks, they moved me out of the barracks because they had more newer people coming along, and they subsidized my housing for apartments. And I happened to be working out at the base, and they put me up in they provided a subsidy for finding a place in Mashpee. So the government took care of my quarters, so to speak. And, when we're bringing people here, their salary is all bundled into, a fixed rate with a lot of things that they now have to take care of, whether it's, the utilities, whether it's rent or mortgage or whatever the case may be. So maybe that's something that, we have to look at as well to see that we can probably enhance something for our employees, because we do it now when we're trying to entice somebody coming here. We're offering to move them there. We're offering to give them a sign-up bonus that doesn't go very far, as in my opinion. But it's a start. The other thing that I think might be beneficial when we're talking about bringing people here is that we never talk about housing with our personnel that come in here. We just assume that they have an address, we know where they're living, but maybe a one-sheet information, full of facts for our employees that we can give out during our in-processing, and maybe that will be a benefit to them as well, so that they do have these other options. I think, we're very assumptive sometimes when people are coming along, but maybe, we do ask people if they're willing to move. Not a lot of them are. Some, as you stated, might, the younger personnel, rentals is what it is. And I think that is a huge help for the single person. Personally, I have 2 children that, they're adults now, but they both, college graduates. One went into work with his degree, and the other one's in grad school, but they're paying $1,300 or more in Vermont for housing, and that's an incredible lot of money for personnel that are, or for, for employees that are making just over minimum wage. But my kids don't complain because they love living in the area. And I think that that's something that we have to do here too, is that we have to entice people. We have to provide more information maybe, and to try and offer, these other options. And I know there's a lot of building, we see it through the department. We know a lot of the plans, a lot of the discussions. And I hope people take advantage of it.
There is a lot of talk in projects. Of course, by the time, everything takes a long time. By the time you get shovels into the ground, et cetera. Can any of you comment, do you think, any ideas of maybe solutions that could come along more quickly? I know, like with Paul, you already have your housing. We talked about that. We have almost 50% of the homes now are second homes here. Any ideas or thoughts about possibly enticing, as the chief talked about, maybe some of those owners to open up their homes, at least during the winter years, and would that be helpful to your organization?
I think for us, we certainly have individuals that, that that are renting over the winter and then are displaced, during the summer. Obviously, that's a challenge for us. I think, you were speaking about the dormitory style and things like that. I think the vast majority of our employees have families, have extended families, and it would be a little bit more challenging, for that type of housing. But I think it's, I think that's kind of the mix of where we are, is really trying to find, multifamily, people that are going to be stable, that are going to stay here, that don't have long commutes, that eat into their already, the wage challenges and expense challenges that they have, so.
Right.
I think, for Public Works, I think we share a lot of the same concerns as the fire department and the police department. The fire department, I think you're on a 30-mile radius. We look at, for Public Works, for a response, we look at the 30-minute, and it's not always the same. Some of it's highway, some of it's back roads, depends on the time of year. But we have folks that need to respond. They need to respond to take care of, skater issues with the water department, the alarm's going off, the wastewater, something's going on down Woods Hole. That's not something you can do over the phone. That needs a response. So there's a call chain for that. I think it could help for some of the workers in Public Works, but I think, as others have mentioned, I think a lot of our staff have families that have already been established. Fortunately, many of our employees in the different divisions already live on Cape. It's the new recruitments that we're trying to entice and bring to the town of Falmouth. I had a conversation yesterday. More often than not, I have people come up and say how beautiful Falmouth is on Cape Cod. We're on the other side. We're on we're not on the 6A side, but they love Falmouth and they come here to be in Falmouth. And the folks that we interview would really like to make it work if they can come to Falmouth. Right. Some of the programs that we do try to offer, we can't always, we work for a municipality, so we cannot always offer monetary funds. But so with our workers, a lot of our workers need to have truck driving CDL licenses. They can't afford that. If you go to a CDL class, it could be $8,000, $10,000. So we opened up a private CDL training program within Public Works that we train all our employees. And all the cost of it is they put their time in after work. We have the CDL instructors. The town pays for all their licensing. So things like that. Licenses, if they're going to go for the water licenses, they're going to go for the wastewater licenses, hydraulic licenses, we pay for that. We put them through the school for that, and we'll train them on work time to try to bring them in. And we try to always keep an edge over the other towns on the Cape. But I think every town is having the same challenges, on Cape and off Cape on the South Shore. On Cape is more of the bridges get tough. They do get tough during the seasonal.
Absolutely.
But off Cape, I think they're
Where
having
they
the
start
same
building the new
challenges.
bridges, right? We'll see how that goes. I know Ann's going to want to open this up to questions soon, but so before I do that, I just want to ask one question. Is this too loud? Sorry. Okay. Thanks, great. So, and again, we're here to have an informational session for people to ask questions and all. We're not asking anybody to solve the problem. Again, a lot of people are working on this. There's a lot of groups, there are a lot of projects in motion. Sometimes it can feel painfully slow. So the question I have is, if we continue at the pace that we're at, without trying to think outside the box, adding more housing, whether it's owning housing, dormitory housing, rental housing, and we're going at the same pace where we're going right now, 5 years from now, what's your organization going to look like, and how's that going to affect you and your ability to provide the valuable services to our town?
Well, I think it's important, to see what it looks like. We will continue to move and pivot and do everything that we need to do to continue to keep this valuable asset, functioning in a way that helps to take care of our community. Without a doubt, it'll be a struggle. It'll continue to be a struggle. I think that we'll continue to work different angles and partner with our communities to try to understand exactly how we can get folks here. But there's no doubt it'll be impactful. I can't speak to exactly what that is, but I do think that we struggle now. Pricing's not going down anytime soon, so unless we see a dip the other way, way, you know, we will still continue to see individuals that struggle with the economics of housing, and we'll continue to have challenges. We'll continue to need to bring in temporary workers, people to help support that piece of it, just as we've done, you know, recently to make sure that we're able to deliver that service. And I think, you know, much like the other gentleman at the table here, you know, these are all valuable community resources that we have to figure out a way to make that happen, and certainly in partnership with our communities, that makes the most sense. But it'll be a challenge.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Yeah, it would be a challenge. Of course, you know, working for a municipality, we have constraints that we have to work for. There's certain things we can do, and there's certain things we cannot do, but I think it would continue to be a challenge. I think what would happen is we would have less and less candidates applying for positions, and eventually, more and more of our services would be contracted out to other companies, which would be a cost for, the funding cost for operations.
You spoke earlier, Paul, about the future and being able to attract the scientists. If we don't start thinking out of the box, supplementing all the good work that's going on already, and really start trying to multiply this, what does MBL, WHOI, by extension, the other scientific institutions, that entire community, what does that look like 5 years from now?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, just, again, from the MBL's perspective, probably differently from my other colleagues up here, we need housing for everyone from, you know, from students all the way up. So we need some of everything. I think, you know, we know that the struggle in renting is going to continue regardless. We know in 5 years it's not going to probably change much. So we're going to figure out how to deal with that. That's just one way or another, we are going to figure out how to deal with that. Where the concerns for me come will be, we're hiring and have plans to hire a lot of new scientists over the next 5 years. We have folks that are retiring, and we need to keep the size of our staff, scientific staff. If we reach a point where they cannot find housing, affordable housing, you know, because the MBL, we are competing against research facilities. We're on the water, we're called the Marine Biological Lab, but we do a lot of basic biology. So we're competing with institutions like Washington University in St. Louis. We're competing with institutions all across the country where housing is not nearly as significant an issue. So I would have concerns over the long haul for MBL if we don't manage to get more housing on the Cape. If we have more housing, the chances are that it won't, you know, that the low supply won't keep driving, you know, prices astronomically high. So that's a major concern for us. And I think the other issue is the same one that has been spoken here. The folks that are supporting the science, I said, like the folks that run our finance department, the folks that keep our campus going. I worry about that because the level of vacancies that we've all talked about that, is really has taken off, and I worry that will continue. And so, you know, we need to do, you know, we gotta have the science. That's the whole point of what we're doing. But if I don't have skilled trades that are keeping my facilities up and going, then they're not going to be able to do their work. And so that's the other area where I see us running into trouble over 5 years if everything just stays sort of as it is.
Great. Chief?
Yeah, I mean, I saw an interesting stat, and probably most of you know, but I see that the average age of a resident in the town of Falmouth is 65 years old. So to try and, you know, get the youth back into town to you know, to help, you know, raise their families and again, be part of the community is something that as employers and the administrative side is, you know, we do have to look at salaries and to be competitive to bring interested and qualified personnel to work. Because as I listen, you know, in Carter's organization isn't just medical. There's, you know, that's what they're there for. But they have a lot of staff that supports it, and whether it's, you know, the people that are working down in central supply, laundry, the kitchen staff, et cetera. For me, I can't do anything without the support of the DPW or the police department. because I don't have employees that do certain types of infrastructure support. And I'm sure, you know, MBL, you know, we're familiar with all the dorms and the housing, or whether it's, you know, along Oyster Pond Road, or whether it's right down in the village. We see the impacts that, you know, or the influx, I should say, of everybody that's coming in and out. So, you know, that's what makes this community special, and that's why I think everybody that's sitting here wants to see what we can all try and do and address. But if we just assume that, you know, that others will be able to do it because we all did it. I know it took me about 4 years before I could build a home. I was renting for a long time, and my money was going to somebody else. I would rather it be utilized by me, you know, I was raised like everybody else. You know, you go to school, you know, you can go to the college or military, because those are the only two choices in my family, and then get a home. And I was fortunate to achieve that, but that was in the 90s. And one of the things that I think that was discussed up here about, you know, our residents and, you know, that work for our organizations. 30 years ago, I think almost 100% of the personnel that worked in my department all lived in the town. That's not the case anymore. Very few actually live in the town of Falmouth because of the costs and available housing that's affordable to them. So the things that will help, maybe the salary side of it, maybe subsidizing, assisting employees, but it's overwhelming because it's a big cost shift. And when you do have a base of residents that's 65 years or greater, then the tax impact is something that's everybody's very mindful for. So I just hope that the conversation continues so that, you know, because, you know, I'm close to 65, so and I get it. And my kids, when I always tease my sons about, you know, I'm going to sell my house, they're like, you're not selling anything. Like, you know, you're going to keep that, because what are we going to get? Right. And they're right. You know, I forget about that, but I want to give them something too for their families. So I thank everybody for you know, for sharing that, and we're all in it together. So hopefully, you know, everything that everybody keeps doing is going to, you know, to help our organizations.
So part of our involvement in this at the Chamber, for those of you who don't know, unlike most of the chambers around, we're not a business-focused chamber. We're a community-focused chamber. So what's good for the community is good for business. And we've adopted the moniker, the Community Connection. And I think that is nowhere better represented if you look at our board of directors. So not only are the 3 local banks on our board, but through the town, Falmouth Police Department on our board, Falmouth Public Schools, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the scientific community, several nonprofits, local artists, because it's impacting. And our board of directors has made this a priority. Housing, and it's come out, and we are not afraid to say it's a crisis. We're in a crisis situation. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to hear people say, it's always been like that, it's no big deal. Blah, blah, blah. Back in my day, it was the same thing, but it's not. So before I turn it, you're going to handle the questions and answers, I imagine?
Well, we might do it together, because I want to write something down.
Okay, that's fine. But before I turn it over to you and start question and answers, it's just a close-end question, yes or no. Do you think more can be done to educate the community that this is indeed a crisis? And we'll start at the end. Chief?
Absolutely, yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Card? I do. Okay.
American Idol.
Right.
Yes, they're on. Okay, so you want to open it up to questions? How do you want to do this?
So 2 things you did. I'm going to steal a microphone for Kim.
Okay.
Kim's going to be our hostess.
Oh.
She's going to bring it to people who want to ask questions.
Thank you.
So if you can ask a question in general, you can share a housing story, you can ask a question to anyone up here, or any of our working group members, which is Colin Reed right there in the front seat, Karen Bissonette, Carrie Walton in the back, Mauro Titus, Tim Fish, Michael, me, but I'm going to sit because I want to hear all the great solutions. Everybody needs to give an idea for a solution.
I'll just point there, because I know Barb beat you to it. Her hand was up like a rocket, so, okay.
Barb Schneider,
Okay.
and I just wanted to say to the chief, 65 is the new 45, and if
Yes.
you don't believe me, come out on the pickleball court.
Did you bring cookies?
And then with that said, that brings me to my first comment, which is, I've been unfortunately going to 3 different physical therapists this year, and then each one gives me a story of quickly. First, the Falmouth Physical Therapy expanded to a Mashpee building, redid what you will remember, faces right across, facing 28 with a ramp, that building. They lost their physical therapist. They actually had to shut down a brand-new facility for 2 months because they couldn't hire and they couldn't get anyone to find housing. Secondly, the one that I go to in Falmouth, the manager has a rental. You bring up the housing and getting booted out in May. This man rents something all winter, takes his family from that rental and goes and lives in a campground every summer. That's how he is managing as a manager of a physical therapy place that we have. And in Sandwich, where they all thought, oh, how easy we can come up from over the bridge, well, that hasn't been so much fun in the last few months. And they're finding that they're having more call-ins for people missing work. Because after 5 days of that, maybe on Monday you don't feel like doing it again. So that's been happening. I also want to say that while 1,000 of us at my age are looking at when do we sell our houses, use the money that we've built up in it to live on for the rest of our lives, which isn't so easy anymore because where do we go anyway? And most of us are probably living as cheap as we're going to in our homes for a while. We're not happy that our homes are at these high prices because we know it means that families aren't going to come into them most likely. It's getting tougher and tougher. I don't know how we solve that. I do know we have to solve getting more families here because our community needs that vibrant diversity. And I see it all the time in all the things I'm involved in, and I'm doing what I can to try and find ways. I would say to the MBL, if you have land, there is a phenomenal company called Vermod, V-E-R-M-O-D. They make prefab housing, net zero energy, that is dropped on a slab the size of a mobile home. Many mobile home parks are actually adding those in when they're buying them and then they're renting them out. If you have property, I would look at those because it is a really great way to fix things. They have been doing that all over the country, and they're especially doing it in Vermont right now, and they are working out really well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barb. Doug Brown had his hand up next. Our select board.
Thank you, Kim. Doug Brown at Falmouth Select Board. So a couple of things. A realtor friend I heard from today told me that the actual average price in Falmouth is $786,000. There's only like 40 houses available on the market. Our newly hired town manager started looking for a place to live in Falmouth because it's a requirement. Couldn't find anything that was reasonable. A house that was comparable to what he's in now in Georgia, in Falmouth, was $6,900 a month for rent. So he asked us to consider letting him live just over the line in Pecasset because he found something that was a little more reasonable. The board voted to let him do it. So that's one thing that's the current status. And Paul, I wonder, all those little cottages that you have down on Oyster Pond, I wonder if you think about rezoning. I remember seeing in the paper, if you remember when, it was a couple of years ago, 1910, MBL buys up a bunch of real estate down on Oyster Pond Road because real estate prices are skyrocketing in 1910, and they're not going to change. So I wonder if you would think about just tearing those cottages down and build something large with multi-units.
Yeah, so as I said, we're definitely in the midst of a major look at all our housing property to figure out what we're going to do, because we recognize that the current configuration, typology, and everything is not matched to where we need to be. So yeah, that's underway, and that's about what I can say right now about it. But we have it's a major look at what we're doing.
Great.
Every developer on Cape Cod in the state of Massachusetts.
Hi, Janet Lauer. I noticed driving around, there's a number, well, you see abandoned, neglected homes, and I'm wondering if the town can take them over by eminent domain and perhaps do a subsidized housing in some of those areas. I mean, they might be single-family homes, but who knows when they were last occupied.
Well, I think maybe Selectman Brown might be able to answer that question more than any of us up here.
Well, we just looked at a bunch of property that's in tax lien status, and that's part of what we're considering there, so.
Is,
Probably not eminent domain.
thank you.
So as we talk about people having to live further from their place of employment and building housing in new areas of Falmouth, are there any plans to create a more robust public transportation network here and on Cape and off Cape in general?
So I can comment a little bit. So the CCRTA is coming up with a pilot program where they're going to have, it's kind of like an Uber service almost with a van, and there are specific routes if you go to the website. They're just rolling it out. I don't have anything printed, so you can actually call and get rides. And I know that they're looking at expanding the Whoosh trolley and other things. So those things are in the work. Anybody who knows Tom Cahir, who runs that, he's very open to that, and I do believe that there are plans and they're more than willing to do that. But I think this was a great first step for them. Alex down at Shipwrecked, sorry, was very instrumental in that as well. So that's a great positive first step.
Is that like the same price as riding the bus or?
Yeah. Oh, great, you get the app? Great, we can look at the app after. But so to answer your question, stuff is being worked on. Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Karen Bissonette, Falmouth Housing Trust. I just want to give you an idea of some out-of-the-box things that people are thinking of. I had a couple approach me who have a house in Ashumet Valley off 151. And believe it or not, let's see, they moved here in 2016 and they bought their home for $285,000. And it now appraises at $600,000. And they feel rather blessed and guilty that their house is worth so much money, and they're actually going to sell it to Falmouth Housing Trust for a reduced amount. And we are going to be able to make that house an affordable home through a deed restriction at 120% of area median income, because we're talking about the missing middle here. So that would be a family that makes around $130,000, $135,000 a year. So for those of you out there listening in TV land, those kind of things are possible. So what happens is that they are going to get a tax deduction for the difference between, you know, the appraised value and what they're selling it to us for. And then the town, through the Affordable Housing Fund, will help us make that. So actually, the town is buying a deed restriction, and it'll be in perpetuity at 120% of area median income. So it will be for those that would be considered moderate income, but those people who we need in this community to fill all those jobs that you people have. So there are out-of-the-box things. If anyone wants to speak about that, I would love to talk to people about that. But, you know, I know it's one house at a time, but it gives another family an opportunity to live in the community.
Thank you. Kim, right up front here.
Had any properties been developed in Falmouth using youth restrictions, which are going to now lapse? Because in the old days, they only lasted for 30 years. And I was involved in another community where we did this, and the 30 years are up, so now they'll be market rate. I think, looking back 30, 40 years, this was all done under the Commonwealth. We were funded through the Commonwealth, and I was wondering if anything was happening at the state level to look at how you can keep these being affordable.
So, can Doug or Karen? Okay.
Hi. So Falmouth Housing Trust in 1990-something had some affordable homes out on Esker Place. There are some of those with an older deed restriction, right? And about 8 of those will be in 2029, I do believe. They'll be becoming market rate homes. And there's really not much we can do about that unless the homeowner wanted to have us purchase the deed restriction from them. I believe they're probably not going to want to do that. But we are trying when, for instance, we are taking a house over there because of foreclosure. And we're putting a new deed restriction on it, so it will be in perpetuity. So the new deed restrictions are in perpetuity. It's really difficult to go back, 25 years ago, but that is what the state required at the time. But unless they voluntarily want to make their home in perpetuity as deed restricted, there's really nothing we can do about those homes going to market rate homes.
Thanks, Karen. Doug, did you want to add to that?
So most affordable housing now gets some funding from DHCD, and I don't believe they've continued that practice. I think they have to be in perpetuity now. But it was an old practice that used to try to incentivize developers to build a building with maybe 30 units. They'd get 30 years out of it, then the developer takes it back, rehabs it into condos, and makes a bunch of money. So that's an old practice that was used to try to get the housing development started, but they realized, I think, that it was a bad idea, and I don't think that's happening anymore.
Oh, let's just get you a microphone. Thank you.
The-
Yeah.
The units that I'm aware of had some sort of state funding behind them, and sort of wondering if there's any way the state can look at it and figure out how to, I don't know, the word is claw back, but it's.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I'm not aware, but that's, yeah. Select Board Member Bob Miscali?
Yeah, thank you. We're talking a lot about deed restrictions with respect to affordability. A number of communities are looking at deed restrictions with respect to getting rid of seasonal leases and making them full-time or full-year rentals as a way of increasing the housing stock. So certainly one of those out-of-the-box possibilities. And another question for Carter and Paul. Is there any interest or thought about partnering with developers, either some nonprofits or some private developers, to capitalize some housing possibilities with a set aside for a certain number of units for your employees going forward?
I would say that is probably one component of what we would be thinking about.
I don't know. I don't know enough about it from my perspective. Sorry about that. I fell down here. But I think, we continue to look at any opportunity that we have around housing for our team. So, yeah.
I think pretty much everything's on the table right now, right? But I think the most important thing is everybody kind of coming together and working together, like the football team going down the field in the same direction. And again, I think the more we get together, it doesn't really matter who leads these conversations, but as long as these conversations are happening and people are participating, and we continue to educate the population and people in leadership positions are willing to work together, we can solve this problem. It is solvable. We can make it happen. The will, I think, is there. And it's just bringing everybody along. And again, we've got some really good projects in place, but we need more, particularly to what Barb talked about earlier and what Ann had alluded to earlier, the 1,000 families leaving the Cape. If we look at our Falmouth Public Schools, right, one of our school committee members is here, and the population continues to decrease, and that's challenging. We need more kids in our schools and more families, and that right there is the first indicator of how challenging it is. And, I'll add another thing here, too. I know people were talking about, the chief talked about his kids not moving back here. I have a recent college graduate who was here for the summer, and she doesn't want to live here. She's moving off. And I have a younger one who's going to be a junior in college, and they don't want to see all their money, go toward housing, which I don't even know if they could do it. We would have to help. But the other thing that's really challenging for them is that the lack of diversity in our town. I have one that's lived 4 years in Burlington, Vermont, and I have another one that's living in Boston. And she comes here into that median age that you're talking about. And as Falmouth continues to draw retirees, we're really becoming a very high-priced retirement community. Great as far as disposable income goes for our businesses and all, but a lot of pressure on our hospitals, and there aren't people to provide the services that they want. So there's a lot of multiple challenges having here, and again, getting families here is mission critical, trying to make that happen. So Any other questions? Yes.
I just want to make one more point, expanding on what my colleague Bob Miscali said, is that program for residential deed restriction, that was put in place in Vail, Colorado. It's a program called Vail Indeed, and they found that all their workers were starting to get pushed out of town and living on the periphery in trailers. And so now they've got a residential restriction, which doesn't make it affordable, but makes it guaranteed to be residential year-round occupied. So what was a surprise that came out of that was they expected it to just retain housing, but it became an opportunity for home ownership, because young people that want to, or any people that want to buy a house, can get this, qualify for this, put this deed restriction on the property, and it gives them a down payment on the house. So it's a great program, and it's, Julian Sear is pushing it right now.
Yes.
To be available in Massachusetts.
Right.
It's working its way through, seems like it's on a positive track, but folks might want to advocate for that as just one more tool. And another thing to mention is the accessory apartment bylaw in Falmouth is now by right, if it's within or attached to your house, and you can have a garage that's separate, you get a special permit for that. But the special permit requirement has gone away if it's in or attached to your house. So that's a great opportunity for seniors to add a unit, maybe rent out the big part, live in the little part, or whatever. So we need to, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's another great example of how, Falmouth, I think, is so far ahead of so many other towns. And, we just got to continue that momentum and keep moving and meeting like this and coming together as a community. So, yes. Dr. Souza?
It's slightly different perspective, and certainly I know there's a housing crisis, and I believe it's a crisis. But one of the things that hasn't been said is that COVID really changed things. It changed things in terms of the workforce, in terms of the way people think about work, but it's also changed housing. I mean, when I bought my house here 7 years ago, it's probably worth twice as much as what I paid for it. And so I'm wondering if we thought about post-COVID and how this has affected workforce and housing. And will it change or not change?
That's a really good point. So one area where it has, and I think Karen can maybe talk about that, is when she's talking about the median income. The income obviously went up because a lot of people moved here, lived here, that are telecommuting and making a lot more money. But I will say, before I let her comment on that, I will say from the Chamber's perspective, we are still heavily inundated with service-oriented businesses that need people who actually go out and work. So I think you're absolutely right. That has changed across the whole nation. Being still a kind of a tourism and retirement type of community, the services here are still pretty high. So, but if you want to comment on how that affected the
It has affected
business.
everything. I'll just give you an example that HUD gives us a number every year for Barnstable County, and in 2021, it was $89,300, which was the median family of four in Barnstable County. It is, as of last month for 2023, $124,300.
Point.
Okay, so that is not people that were here prior to COVID.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions or comments? Any comments from our panelists? No? Thank you so much for your time. Thanks to HAC for putting this together, coming into Falmouth, for everybody participating. Where Falmouth will be is we will end up just being a very high-priced retirement community with the people who are living here struggling for basic services.
48% of our workforce travels from over the bridge.
The first thing I think of is the exodus of Falmouth youth. As soon as they graduate from school and they're out from under their parents' wing, they just can't afford to stay here. So we're at the point now where we're talking crisis.
Falmouth has a rapidly mounting housing crisis. If not addressed, the middle-class workforce we rely on will disappear, forced to live far from the local community and their work.
Both my husband and I work for the school system, and we should be able to find a place to stay. October of 2021, we had to move. And, you know, we basically couldn't find any place to live.
A 2-3 bedroom. I think the range may be anywhere between 2,000 to about 2,600 or 800, depending.
There is no security, and I feel so horribly for the people, including myself, that just have grown up here and you know, and put their roots here and have done so much for the community, and basically we're just getting kind of like a slap in the face, like, sorry, figure it out. Like, if you have to move to Wareham, move to Wareham. If you have to move to Plymouth, move to Plymouth. If you have to move out of the state, move out of the state.
Dylan Fernandez has a valuable perspective because he represents Falmouth, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket.
What we see on Nantucket is what the Cape will be very soon if people don't step up, and that is, you know, the median listing price right now on Nantucket is $6 million. Actually, the schools on Nantucket are majority minority now. Those are the children of the families that are doing a lot of the work out there and keeping the island running. And then you have a hospital system on Nantucket that has had to buy a lot of its own housing because its hospital workers can't afford housing. You have just dozens of open municipal positions at the town of Nantucket because no one, like, the salary is pretty generous, but no one can afford to live there.
Communities will always have housing needs for those living under the poverty line, but Falmouth's challenge is far deeper. Our housing crisis also displaces middle-income earners and professionals.
We've transitioned from worrying about the 60 to 80% income level range to now where we realize it's more like the 120% income range. And if we go there, Falmouth has to fund those affordable housing initiatives on our own because the state won't do it. So the whole thing is shifting, and as our younger workforce population exits, our demographic shifts. And now the average median income changes again, so now it's even more unattainable. So we're at a tipping point where the whole affordable housing structure is starting to fail to be applicable here in Falmouth.
You know, some of the statistics that are frightening that I would tell people is for any community to house everybody, or the majority of the people that work in that town, from the person that serves you coffee in the morning to the surgeon that's doing your hip replacement at the hospital, 30% of all residential property needs to be rental. Whether it's apartments, whether it's houses for sale, whether it's multifamilies where part of the house is for sale, where people don't own but have the ability to rent at reasonable rates, needs to be available. That is, we know that's the statistic. In Falmouth, that hovers around 6%.
Short-term rentals has been really, really tough. You know, I'm always hesitant to speak poorly of them because people are allowed to make money. But the fact of the matter is, when you take away from our year-round rentals to make short-term rentals, it's going to impact our community big time. I mean, if you get a job here and is this where you want to stay? You don't want to purchase a home and see if this is where you want to live. Do you want to stay in that job? But there's no place to rent, and that's why 48% of people that work on the Cape are coming from over the bridge, because there just isn't any rentals.
Falmouth needs a housing plan, and part of that plan must be an understanding that when we build more densely, we have to work hard to maintain the character that makes this town special.
So all these things can be solved. All these issues can be solved with design. And so I'm interested in how to incentivize the design process for our community and become a community that is known for making a municipal commitment to the architecture fees, making a municipal commitment to urban planning, to design fees. And architects all around the country, believe me, the word gets out. Falmouth is a community where I want to go work because other cool buildings are being built. I just think there's a really simple opportunity here to draw talent to the community and let talent show us what the built environment can look like.
Often when I talk to people on various boards about, hey, that project, just really doesn't look that good in our community, I hear the comments that, well, we can't dictate design. I don't believe that. And I think we have to be more stringent on demanding good design and having good examples.
You can have density and you can have good design. You can have housing and density without compromising the look or the character or the feel of Cape Cod.
Density is just fine when it's handled well. I mean, people go to Paris and Florence and great little villages all over the world, and they go back there because they're dense and they're fabulous and you walk through them, but they're beautiful.
One thing that's missing from our community is a future plan. Not just in words, but in vision too. We need a vision plan for our community. And a good example is having a good, handbook with good illustrations that say, this is what we like. So when a developer who comes to town and wants to do something here, they've got something they can look at and say, okay, I can see this community wants high quality work.
In my opinion, if we don't do something now to prepare for what's already on its way, we're going to be in trouble in just a few years. I don't think it's 5 or 10. I think it's on our doorstep, and we need to take action to get a grip on this. What I say to people is prepare for change, because change is inevitable. We just need to plan what the change is going to be and get it figured out before it happens unexpectedly.